Pleasure to be here as a person who spent much of his life in academics. It's nice to be in a college setting. So take a trip through time. So what you're about to hear is a 7-year adventure. Finding and acquiring historical photographs, repeating each of them as precisely as possible. And as a scientist, that's very important to me. Writing and publishing this book. And there were 22 sources of historical photographs. Roughly half of the sources were in Arizona, and the other half spread across the country, from the Pacific to the Atlantic. Now, the key goal, as Rusty mentioned, of repeat photography is to match each historical point and the framing of the photograph. Of course, where the photographer, the historical photographer stood. Framing refers to the outside edge of the photograph. Oops. What I used there were landforms, distinctive rocks to help me frame the photograph of my repeat photograph. Also, another match the day or the season of the year. And sometimes this is exceedingly difficult to do. Rarely was it easy to do. There we go. So I used published records, if there were any, of the photograph of the historical photographer, especially those that came from books, oftentimes put in a date. If I didn't have that, I could use snow to make a rough estimate of the time of year. It was summer, spring. These, in other words, on the aspens, for example, and those would tell me in general what time of year it was, that type of thing. Another important goal there was to match the time of day. Shadows with the light, and the shadows would enable me to do that with many of the photographs. Another very important goal for me was to facilitate somebody else redoing this in 25 years, 50 years, 150 years. It's exceedingly important to me. It was a lot of work, 7 years, and I don't want the person to have to go through the same task. And a little closer. Let's see here. There we go. So first of all, I didn't realize that popped up. Let me see if I can go backwards. Not really. So the first point there is that I recorded the GPS coordinates of the photo point. And anybody who's done this and then attempted to relocate that point knows that this is just an approximate location. It's not very precise. So I wanted to be more precise than that for the people in the future. So I marked the photo point with a small pile of rocks. Now, if I was in somebody's lawn, I didn't do that. But if I was out in the boondocks, that was what was done, just a pile this high. That may or may not be here 50 years from now, but I thought it was worthwhile trying. Getting two at a time. Here we go. I photographed my tripod position on the photo point. So I stood back away, left the tripod on the above the rocks on the photo point, and made a photograph to give the setting where I was standing. In addition to that, I went back to the photo point and I took a wide angle photograph, 0 degrees. In other words, right in the direction I took to repeat, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and 270 degrees. So that gives people 4 different views to relocate that photo point precisely. Should be much less difficult than what I faced. Third goal, as an ecologist, I wanted to cover each of the ecosystems found in the around San Francisco peaks. It was very important to me. So the pinyon juniper woodland, as you can see in the foreground there. In the midground, the ponderosa pine. And then as we head up the San Francisco peaks, next conifer and quaking aspen intermix with the light green of the quaking aspen. Above that, dark green only, fir forest, and above tree line, of course, the alpine tundra. Fourth goal was to try to meet any unanticipated challenge. So, for example, I was repeating a photograph along the stagecoach line that ran to the South Rim. And I used a historian's map of where it went. Didn't work. So I had to go off trail, which was fine, and relocate that, which I did here. Another example, which totally surprised me, was that I had a photograph from the roof of Old Main. And so I had to, of course, contact the university, get permission from them to go up there. Of course, I had to go with somebody. He tied me in. And so that was quite a unique experience. Also, another event was going up on a lift of the Flagstaff Fire Department. And I'll talk more about this when I show you the photograph. So from the images around the San Francisco peaks, the first published drawing was 1851. First known photograph, now there may have been some taken beforehand, before this, but the first known one was 1867. So I limited my project to images dating from 1851 to 1910. Of course, there were many more after 1910. But by 1910, there was pretty much a good selection of photographs from around the San Francisco peaks. So that's why I stopped at that point. And to be frank, I just did a few of the historical drawings, and perhaps I'll explain a little bit about that as we go on. So the images that you'll be seeing soon will phase from the historical image to the black and white repeat to the color repeat. So during that time, I won't say a word. You can just watch it phase in from the black and white, from the historical to the black and white to the color. Go. East of the San Francisco peaks.
Switch right there to the left.
So obviously the original was a drawing. 1858, excuse me, as you can see on the left side here. So you stare at these two, and there's not a lot of similarity there, is it? Things have changed. Perhaps something else went on. So by the time the first photographs of this site were taken 33 years after the drawing, what did that show? Had the volcanoes moved further apart over those 33 years? I don't think so. Had the volcanoes become less steeply sloped? Evidence of the lake. Did you notice the lake in there? I should have pointed that out to you. There's no lake there today, and 33 years afterwards, there was no sign of a lake in the photographs. So again, these are simply people who were the artists who drew these drawings, just put into the drawing to make it more attractive, apparently. So after repeating a few of these, few additional drawings, I concluded these were not sufficiently precise to really learn much in terms of the ecological changes since the drawing was done. So the book, by the way, has about, I think there are 4 drawings in there, just to give you an idea of why I did not pursue that to any length. So at that site then, that I just showed you that phasing in, by the time the first photographs on the site were taken 33 years later, these are the questions that came up. So I concluded again, it was not sufficiently precise. First photograph showing the San Francisco peaks. 1867. It's supposed to be phasing into the color. Not quite sure what to do with this. Well, let me back up and see. Back it up.
Yeah, I'm trying to go back to slides.
Yeah,
16.
one.
Will it just fade in here?
Yeah, this should start out with the black and white and phase into the black and white repeat. Okay, let's see if it works this time. Cross your fingers. Aha.
That's good.
Here we have the 1867 photograph on the left and the black and white repeat on the right, about 4 or 5 years ago. This is one of the most important photographs to me. I love the San Francisco peaks, and I had to repeat the very first photograph taken of the peaks. And so I spent quite a bit of time trying to find this location. It was not an easy task, east of Flagstaff, of course, and eventually got closer and closer and closer. Probably took me about 4 or 5 days to actually find the photo point. And one of the points I'd like to make is the photo point was on private land. I went up to the door, knocked on the door of the people that own the property. I had never met them before. I was in my field clothes. All I had to show them was a historical photograph. They said, sure. And not everybody did that, but it was rare that I was not allowed on people's land to do photography. So you can see the GMS. Sorry, this is a new device, not use this. Here we go. So the 2 soldiers right there, they were part of this expedition with the photographer. And what they were doing is that they were planning a route for the railroad to go from the Midwest United States to California, connected to. They passed through here. Alexander Gardner, of course, was the photographer. Now, as you look at this, any ecological changes other than homes and so forth invading the land there. But if you look at this, I'm not used to this. There we go. If you look at the San Francisco peaks, then and now, you see a lot more white, a lot more snow appearing on the San Francisco peaks now, right? Does that show up to your eyes too? Okay. So it's not necessarily that there's more snow. The big change that has occurred is crown fires. So extensive crown fires on the east slopes of the San Francisco peaks and the Dry Lake Hills result in snow when it falls showing up in the photograph. Well, back then, of course, being forested, not as much would show up, not as much of the snow would show up. The only thing I didn't recapture was the, afraid to hit the, one more time. I'll get used to this, I hope. So the only thing I couldn't recapture are the shadows right there in the lower right-hand corner. The photographer, right? No question about that. Flagstaff. You know where Old Town is, but if you don't, it's about a mile west of downtown. That's where Well, there's a Old Town Springs there, and that's why these buildings were built there, because of the water supply. They were built there starting in 1881 because the railroad was going to pass through of Arizona, or what became Arizona. And so that's why the photographer was there to show the original settlement of Flagstaff. About a year after the photograph was taken, and was never rebuilt as a metropolitan area. Instead, it was rebuilt with these homes here. But I think the key thing to notice here from an ecological standpoint is how much this has changed. Not just because of the buildings are no longer there, the commercial buildings are no longer there, but look at the beautiful ponderosa pine forest on the slopes of Mars Hill in the background above Old Town. Those trees, for the most part, are still there. You can see them in the very top of the ridge there. But what blocks the view today are invasive species, non-native species that have either invaded on their own or been planted nearby, and then the seeds go in and develop and have blocked the view.
So what street is that?
That is Old Town? No.
Next to the railroad,
Yeah, the railroad. I was basically standing right on the railroad.
Yeah.
Is this Coconino Avenue? I should remember.
That
I'm
sounds
drawing a
right.
blank.
What is it? I'm lower, but I hiked
It asked me, I can try to look it up. I know I can look it up because it's in the book. You have to buy the book to get it. Milltown.
Yes.
Oh, this is Milltown in the early 1890s. Milltown was built at the same time as Old Town was. And it was built actually before the railroad got here. So that by the time the railroad got close, they could supply the railroad with various logs, especially for tracks, for the ties on the tracks. Yeah, and it was, this is not the first sawmill built there. There was a smaller one built, and then a larger, that was too small, and a larger one then replaced it. And yes, please. So the Reardon, at this time, the Reardon brothers owned this. And one of the Reardons is standing by the logs in the train on the railroad there. And the other one is on the far left here. They're the two Reardon brothers who built the Reardon Mansion, State Historic Park. Now, first buildings in Newtown. '84, and the first building is the one that's on the right, this one here, which was the general store. And it was then on the corner, what is now is known as Route 66 in the foreground and North San Francisco off to the side. And I love the photograph because the people posed there. It was clearly a big thing for them to be in this picture. Took me a while to figure out how to repeat this picture because obviously it wasn't taken from the ground. And I thought, before I learned much more, at first I thought it must have been taken across the tracks, some type of structure was built there. No. So when I first repeated this, I repeated it from the ground. And I thought, I'm just going to have to stay with that. And I finally got up the nerve to contact the fire department. And fortunately, there was a person high up in the fire department who was very interested in the history of Flagstaff. And I connected with him very, very nicely. And so they photographed of me up in a lift, a lift for the fire ladder was taken, and it was done. It was ordered so I could take this repeat. So I knew where the structure, I figured out what it had to been taken from. I looked at other photographs of Old Town. Later on, I acquired more, Newtown, acquired more from further distance away. And what they showed was a water tower. And that's because, of course, of the steam railroad relied upon the water. And then I realized, the photographer, Whittick, must have climbed up there and taken this photograph on the top of the water tower. So from other photographs, I could figure out exactly where the water tower was. And I just asked the fire department to meet me on this specific spot. They took me up off the ground and stopped. And I said, oh, a few more feet. Stop me again. Perfect match. So I was very, very fortunate that the fire department cooperated with us. And that was one of the amazing things about this. 90% of the people I reached out to and contacted were very cooperative in pursuing this project. Ecologically, what can you learn from this? Most people, I think, believe that Flagstaff began in a ponderosa pine forest. No, it's not a forest. Now, there are a couple stumps that show up in there, so I'll grant you a few trees were cut. And let's see, right over there are a couple stumps. And, but that doesn't account for this. This is more of a savanna than a forest. In fact, in the foreground, it's more of a grassland. And it was a grassland because the water from the slopes would go down slope, carrying the finer particles of soil, making a very fine soil down there that the trees could not, the ponderosa pines could not grow in very well. So while a few of them got close to invading, there are none that are close to what was then downtown Newtown, Flagstaff.
From erosion in the hills, the file of the hills in 1884 picture. You mean the trail books or foreground or the background? Background. He's asking if like Mount Eldon area is showing erosion in the house.
Mount Eldon in the background there, you can see burning a crown fire. Yes, what was it? Before I moved there, 1960s, 50s?
76.
76, thank you. Any other questions about Newtown? Half a mile north of Newtown. This is what it used to look like. So this was taken in the 1880s, 1890s. A little bit surprised that source of this didn't have a better information on when it was taken. It certainly shows a dramatic change just north of. And one of the things that also reaffirms is what I was saying before, is that Flagstaff did not start in a ponderosa pine forest. That it was a savanna with widely spaced, beautiful trees, but very. Here, as you look at those, that beautiful scene, and you look at on the right, ignoring the buildings, how many ponderosa pines do you see in the view on the right? I counted 2. They're sort of, I'm sure I hit the right one here. 2 ponderosas, and that's it. All the rest are non-native species. Look at this photograph. Pay special attention to this rock. I don't believe this photograph was possible. I saw the historical one. I knew it was the drainage just outside of the Museum of Northern Arizona building, the main building. There's no question about that. So I walked out there. It took me maybe 5 or 10 minutes to find the photo point, very close to the flagpole for those of you who walked out there. And you know, it's very different today. It's filled in with trees. And so I soon noticed that out on it. Rocks are my best friends. Unique rocks are my best friends, and cooperating with light, even better friends. So I paid special attention to this rock right here. And one of the unique things about the photograph by Edgar Mearns, it actually gave the day it was taken. Most photographs, historical ones, just gave the year. Some of them gave the month and the year. It was very uncommon for it to give the day, month, year. And this one did. So, of course, what I did was arrange to go out on June 3rd before dawn. I knew I had already picked out the photo point. set up my camera before any light got there. And I was not real confident this was going to work because, as you can see, down in the drainage especially, the forest is much more dense. And it was more dense around the drainage as well. So I really did not expect this to work out, but I had to try it. So I got there at just a little bit before dawn. And as soon as the sun hit this rock, what? 50-50 chance. As soon as the sun hit that rock, I started to take photographs every minute, repeating them again and again and again and again, expecting to lose that light. And eventually it got to what the view you have on the right here, where it was a near perfect match for the shadow on that rock. So that's why down below here, I not only give the date, but I give the time of the photograph. So the time of the historical photograph. So that was tremendous fun. Red Mountain. You've driven to the South Rim, as I'm sure you all have. You go right by Red Mountain. So a very distinctive landmark, very close to 180. And there's a trail, of course, that goes up in there. I'm sure several of you, if not most of you, have been out there. This photograph pairing was troublesome for me. But I'll give you a little bit of the background of the ecology first. The historical photograph was probably taken, maybe 20 years after a fire had been through the pinyon juniper woodland there. And you can see some of the snags still on the ground there. A few of the live trees of the fire escaped the fire. And there's not been a fire since then on this particular site. So you can see the regrowth of the pinyon juniper woodland. Quite a change in those years. Now, the other thing that I want to generally point out for you here is the importance of the shadows. That's what allowed me to match the time of day that this was taken. So if you look at this area of shadows here, and then the shadows in my repeat, you can see they're very close to an exact match. So that was what I was striving for, of course. Well, Gilbert was a geologist, so he was really intrigued by this. And he took the photograph here, and then he went up to around here and took two photographs of the interior, closer up, obviously. And then he went way up here and took another photograph with very small volcanic structures in there, erosional structures. So I came back home and was working on the photographs. And the borders, the boundaries of the photographs, I couldn't get them to match. I could match some of the structures inside. And then as I got out, if I matched them in the very center of the photograph and I moved out to the sides, the match got poorer and poorer. And so I was really frustrated with this. And I went back and repeated them maybe twice more, thinking I had done something wrong. Well, that wasn't me. It was the historical lens that was used in the 1891. And so I was talking with some people about this, and one of the persons suggested, well, John, what you need to do is that you need to find out, read through the historical records, find out what kind of a camera they used back then for the photographs. Get a camera like of that brand and model, and repeat it with that. 3 or 4 years on this. And I thought, well, I'm not going to live long enough to complete the project. So I decided not to do that. And the other reason for not doing that, think about it 50 years from now, doing that, well, than it would be today. So I decided, no, I want to simplify it for the future, because one of my primary goals was to encourage this to be redone again and again into the distant future. So I continued to use my same lens, which presumably is a better lens than what was used in 1891.
Is the ridge line, is that vegetation or is that just rock formation?
No, that's ponderosa pine forest up on the ridge, on the top of the crater. that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. Right. So, yeah, these ponderosa pine forests. And I was surprised at a little change in the ponderosa pine forest. And I think the reason for that is the reason maybe that our suppression didn't lead to a greater increase in the density of the forest there is that's a very dry site because of the volcanic soil. And so it's never had the opportunity, apparently, to increase much in density. One of the few sites of all the photographs I took where ponderosa pine forest does not show a significant increase in density. Along the stagecoach route to the Grand Canyon to the South Rim. The photographer, Fred Plain Clatworthy, that's his wagon there in horses. And he was in Flagstaff a couple times for at least a few months each time. And then he eventually settled in Colorado. And I think we've got enough time for me to tell you a Fred Plain Clatworthy story, which I find simply amazing. He grew up around Chicago and acquired a job in New York City. And after a few years in New York City, he decided he wanted to go to the Southwest. And what he did first was to go back to Chicago. Well, he could have taken the train. He rode his bike from New York City to Chicago. Well, that's impressive enough. But then to get to the Southwest, he started to ride his bike from Chicago to Arizona, to Flagstaff. And he got to New Mexico, he got to Colorado, joined a friend there who also biked with him, and they biked down to New Mexico, and they started having the bikes break down. So they started the bikes, bought some horses, and the horses took them to Flagstaff. Yes.
Pictures. Do we know if there was any grazing going on at this in 1900?
This
the
date,
grazing impact?
without question. Yeah. Without question, the livestock were grazing much of the landscape, this part of the north of the peaks.
We know the intensity of the grazing then versus now.
No way of really knowing that I'm aware of, other than to observe the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings up the changes in the landscape. And I don't see a dramatic change in the forage, the herbaceous layer. A little bit more dense, for example, look here, it's fairly well grazed, not quite so abundantly grazed in that location. So maybe because of the requirement that they not simply graze on the same site day after day, month after month, but actually move the livestock from site to site may have helped with this. So Clatworthy took quite a few photographs. I'd say maybe 10 of them or so in the book, and owe it to him. Other vegetation change here, this is pinyon juniper, a little bit of increase in the trees, of course, but not as dramatic as elsewhere. Many other sites apparently are more moist, maybe finer soils, and this is a well-drained site and in a very dry location. You can see some lines down here, and at first glance you might think, well, those are the leftover tracks from the stagecoach that used to go here. Well, in inspecting those, what I thought they were livestock trails and what wildlife trails going up and down this drainage. Looked like a track, a wagon track, or a car track. Fort Valley, along Highway 180, Snowball Road leaves from Fort Valley. The edge of Fort Valley goes up, and private land down in the valley. You can see quite a few I'm pausing. I do this right. I did. There we go. Quite a few homes down in the valley there today. I live about a mile directly west from this site. So this was a photograph that was really important to me. So I walked over in the direction where I knew it had been taken in general, where it had been taken from. Walked a little bit around there, and fortunately it was on Forest Service land. So the trees were uncut for the most part, and no homes were built there, no lawn, no grass, anything like that. So I wanted to, like with every photograph, wanted to be as precise as I could. I walked back there a couple times, two or three different days, and then it dawned on me. Maybe it should have dawned on me sooner. This tree here is this tree. And then for detail, there's a stump right there, another stump right there, and another stump right there. Those three trees. So obviously that enabled me to be very precise in relocating the photograph. Increased intensity of the ponderosa pine forest in the foreground. Right, Fort Valley is named Fort Valley because of Fort Moroni. And Fort Moroni was built by the Mormons in 1881. And the Mormons had a contract with the railroad to supply wood for the railroad tracks, for the rails. And so they built a fort there. And the fort is actually this building right here. So archway. My best guess for that one is that if people had to go back in there at night, this enabled them to see it, see where the archway was, see where the entryway was. No other idea about that. The other buildings over here are a few couple homes and outbuildings where they stored various materials. So, actually Fort Moroni was showing up barely in the previous photograph, and I forgot to mention that. Anyhow, this book is the first book ever published to have a photograph of Fort Moroni in it. Other books have been published and claimed that they were Fort Moroni, showing Fort Moroni, but actually what they were showing were these buildings here. So being from Fort Valley, I was very proud to have looked into this. Our prairie. So this is the northern part of Hart Prairie, and there's a fair amount of private land there. You can see some of the private homes in the background right here. So much of this land right in here is privately owned. Just to the south of this, the Nature Conservancy has a preserve, Hart Prairie Preserve. And so I was able to talk to several people who live there, and I knew some of the people who work for the Hart Prairie Preserve. And they all said, well, yeah, we know the photograph, it's on our wall, but no, we don't know where it was taken from. And so it was, I just felt the need to find this one, since it was important to other people as well. And so in talking with the Nature Conservancy, said, well, we've looked and it's not close to the close to Hart Prairie. You need to start out walking about a mile away and just go through the forest and look for these rocks. Obviously, they're very distinct. So I one morning and started out about a mile away. You can't walk a straight line through a forest because you had to zigzag in order to try to find these rocks. So I spent most of the day zigzagging through this forest trying to find these rocks, very distinctive rocks. I got to about 50 feet from the edge of Hart Prairie, and there they were. So it was quite a thrill to come across them, but there were some challenges as well. And that is that when I first found them, that was all forested in front of the rocks. That's why when I walked the prairie, I couldn't see them. I didn't see them. But in walking through the woods, I could find them. And this is a perfect example of why I sometimes call distinctive rocks my best friends, because they often led to me determining what the location is for my repeat photograph. So I was able to relocate them, and the Forest Service, in talking with them, first they didn't believe me it was a site, but they eventually did. And then they decided they wanted to clear out the trees that had invaded right in this foreground area right here. So they cleared them out with the assistance of the Nature Conservancy and with the assistance of the Arizona Conservation Corps, and enabling me to go back and take the photograph and not just show a bunch of trees. Now you might notice something here. This rock here is this rock. And notice they're not the same height, nor are they the same size. They look taller and larger. It looks taller and larger in this photograph. Same thing for this rock over here. These rocks in the shade here. Taller and larger, right? Reason for it was the Forest Service left one tree. And that tree was right behind the photo point. I'm sorry, the photo point was right behind the tree. So therefore I had to go in front of the tree about 5 feet in order to reshoot the photograph. Only 5 feet, and you can see the enormous difference it made in the foreground. It's not a perfect match, but it's the best I could do without cutting down the ponderosa pine myself, and I didn't think that would be appropriate. Yes.
So did you carry the original historical photo with you each time you
Oh,
were
yes.
searching for the site? And
Sure.
so even when you were in the crane, you had it there in
Yes.
your hands to say,
Right.
up a few more feet?
Yeah, I may not have had the original, but I had a copy of the original.
Wow.
Yeah, I usually didn't take the original out in the woods with me, just trying to protect them as best as I could.
The little I'll call them bush things there, are those rocks, junipers? I can't tell from here. Plants that, yeah.
They're willows, and I'm blanking out on the name of the willow.
Okay.
That's willow. Yeah.
Okay. Willows.
Actually, there's quite a bit more in the historical photograph to show you. So I think we got enough time to go into this. Notice this line going across the photograph? That was a wagon road going north from Flagstaff. And also, this is really hard to see. So let me get close to pointing this out. Right here, you see 2 tracks headed away from the photo point. And it's not a road, but there are tracks here. So I noticed that, and I blew up the photograph to see what these white things were. The 2 large white things on the right are both tents, and some vaguely white things over here on the left are wagons. So this was a campsite for apparently for the crew that this photographer went with. If you really wanted to get into detail, I got carried away now and then. Black mark right there on the aspen. Carved initials, but not new initials because they blackened as they feel. So somebody else probably took a photograph 20 years or so before this, from this very same site, roughly 20 years before. Would be my best guess. So that was a fun photograph to deal with. Oh, I'm glad that didn't work. Meant to show you about the ecological changes besides the small ones in the foreground here. Ecological changes. Notice the grassland right there, all forested today. Out fire, as fires were prevented, the trees invaded the forest, invaded the grassland. Notice this grassland here. And then you notice this partially grassland here. That too had been all forest. Trees had invaded, but the Nature Conservancy, along with other crews, have worked in there to remove the trees. And if you go back there today, there's even more open land there than there was back when I took the repeat photograph. Another notice, see that gray area right there on the slope? That gray area is where a crown fire burned in Spruce Forest. And over the 120, 30 years, 40 years, that has largely regrown in Spruce Forest. Over on this slope of Humphreys, you can see it's a patchy growth there. And today it's much more homogeneous, although there are a couple sites there where there are no trees. So that also shows you more detail of the changes in the vegetation on the slopes. All for this photograph. Photograph in the 1890s. Calvin Osmond was a professional photographer based in Flagstaff for a while. And I am confident that this is a commercial tour group. Because look at the dress of most of the people in the group. It's pretty fancy dress for back then. The other thing to notice is that suggests they're posed. Woman right there with a telescope, she's looking right into the wall of the of the landscape in front of her that she's posing for the photography. So, from an ecological standpoint, the primary thing to notice in the historical photograph is all this gray. For that is, it was burned in a crown fire. I'm trying to remember the year. I've got it in my notes here. Let me see if I can bring that out. 1879. So that crown fire burned in 1879. You look at that landscape today and it's reforested. I shouldn't have said today. If you looked at that landscape a couple of years ago, it was entirely reforested. This area here of Doyle Peak burned in one of the crown fires that was a year ago last spring. This photograph sort of frustrated me for a little bit. I enjoyed it, but I was still frustrated because when I was so captivated by it showing the landscape with the crown fire. So when I got home and started looking at it in more detail, I noticed that the foreground is a terrible match. Small rocks there, big boulders there. So the very next day, I hiked back up there and inspected it again, thinking, well, I must have been 50 feet off or something. And so I walked all around there. No, this was the site where that photograph had been taken, except it's been lowered by a few feet by landslides. So erosion landslides coming down off of this bridge here in the foreground. It's changed that the basis for that site. So a few reviewer comments about the book. Kevin Schindler with Lowell Observatory. Peter Fillet, forest ecologist with Northern Arizona University. Sean Golightly, environmental reporter for the Arizona Daily Sun, published a review of the book a few months ago. And William Wallace Covington, another forest ecologist with Northern Arizona University, although retired. A lot of help. One of the primary thank yous is with Solstice Publishing. They have published the book. Came out in early December, late November, something like that. And especially thank you to editor Julie Hammonds. Great advice, great assistance, and her management in preparing the book for publication was irreplaceable. Mary Ross design. Oh my. What can I say? I can't say enough about Mary Ross. She's the one who designed the cover to the book. And when I first saw this, of course it wasn't on the cover, I just saw it on the computer screen. I'm blown away by it. Basically, it includes half of a historical, half of my repeat of that historical photograph paired side by side. And it just so captivated me and captivates most people that I stared at it probably for an hour or so, and I still find myself occasionally doing that. And it wasn't for another day, maybe even 2 days, that I finally noticed around the outside of this photographs, that's the second oldest drawing showing the San Francisco Peaks. And so she also combined that in there active, it distracted me from seeing the whole picture of what she did. To me, it was just incredible what Mary has done. Tom Alexander, I worked with Tom in order to hit my repeats and the historical ones parallel, because not often were they exactly in rotation the same, so we worked together to do that. Tom did a wonderful job with me, and very impressive. Private landowners, I mentioned this already. Knock on their doors, never having seen me before, dressed in field clothes, and I show them an old picture. Can I look at your land in order to try to find the site for this picture? Probably asked this to 30 people or so, 30 different locations, turned down twice. And that tells me so much about Flagstaff. So I deeply indebted to people letting me on their land. And often, usually, I had to go back to their land more than once, sometimes 2 or 3 times. Very cooperative. And lastly, and not leastly, Betty Huffman, my partner, my wife, her encouragement, advice, patience, and her love. It's been incredible.